Medieval life was darker than you think. When we think of medieval Europe, we imagine something straight out of a fairy tale. Gallant knights defending castles, ladies in silk gowns walking through rose gardens, and peasants cheerfully singing while they work in the fields. But strip away the myth, and the truth is far darker. For most people, life in the Middle Ages was a nightmare of disease, starvation, filth, and fear. Castles were not glittering palaces, but damp prisons of stone. Knights were not noble heroes, but often violent warlords. And the romance of medieval life was built on the suffering of millions. Tonight, we'll leave behind the fairy tales and step into the disturbing reality of everyday life in medieval Europe. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Castles. Fairy tale versus reality. Fairy tales show castles glowing like jewels, filled with music and feasts. The truth, castles were cold, damp, and suffocating fortresses. Walls wept with moisture, straw on the floors soaked up filth, and smoke from open fires filled the air until it choked. Meals were hardly the elegant banquets we imagine. Meat was often half rotten, disguised with spices. Bread could be filled with sand or ground beans to stretch the flour. Even in the king's hall, hygiene was non-existent. People wiped greasy hands on the tablecloth or tossed bones and scraps on the floor for dogs. As for knights, forget shining armor and honor. Many acted as ruthless thugs for their lords, raiding villages, seizing crops, and abusing the peasants they were supposed to protect. Chivalry was less a way of life and more a story told to justify violence. Chapter 2. Filth and Plague. Medieval towns were some of the filthiest places in history. Imagine walking down a narrow street where chamber pots were emptied from windows above, raw sewage mixed with mud below, and the stench of animals and unwashed bodies clung to every breath. Bathing was rare. Many believed water spread disease, so people might go months or years without washing. Lice, fleas, and bedbugs infested homes and clothing. Vermin scurried across floors, sometimes even sharing beds with families. And then came the Black Death. In the mid-1300s, the plague swept across Europe like wildfire, carried by fleas on rats. Within 5 years, it killed up to 50 million people. Families abandoned their loved ones, entire towns vanished. Corpses piled in streets faster than they could be buried. Priests read last rites over mountains of the dead. This was no fairy tale curse. It was the cruel reality of a world without medicine or mercy. Chapter 3. Hunger and the Great Famine. Fairy tales often show peasants feasting in rustic taverns. In truth, hunger was constant. The average diet was bread, porridge, and weak beer. Meat was a luxury few ever tasted. Malnutrition left people stunted, weak, and vulnerable to disease. And when crops failed, famine descended like a monster. Between 1315 and 1317, relentless rain destroyed harvests across Europe. Grain rotted in the fields, livestock drowned, and millions starved. Chroniclers wrote of desperate people eating roots, dogs, and even human flesh. Parents abandoned children, and corpses were left unburied because survivors lacked the strength to dig graves. The fairy tales forgot to mention that for much of the Middle Ages, survival itself was a battle lost by millions. Chapter 4. Justice or Terror. We imagine medieval justice as wise kings listening to disputes in a great hall. Reality was cruel and bloody. For crimes, punishments were meant to terrify. Thieves had their hands cut off. Traitors were boiled alive. Heretics were burned at the stake while the crowd cheered. And then there were the ordeals. To prove innocence, an accused person might carry a red-hot iron, plunge their arm into boiling water, or be thrown into a river bound hand and foot. If they sank, they were innocent, though usually drowned in the process. If they floated, it was proof of guilt, and they were executed. Medieval justice wasn't about truth, it was about fear and control. Chapter 5. Childhood in the Middle Ages. In fairy tales, childhood is magical. princes, princesses, and adventures. But in reality, childhood was brief and brutal. Up to half of all children died before the age of 5. Those who survived were quickly put to work. By age 7, a child might labor in the fields from dawn until dusk or serve as an apprentice in grueling trades. Education was reserved for the wealthy or the clergy. Most children grew up illiterate, destined to live and die in the same fields as their parents. Marriages could be arranged in adolescence, and life as an adult began far sooner than we can imagine today. Childhood as we know it simply did not exist. Chapter 6: Faith, Fear, and the Church. Religion in fairy tales is often a source of hope. Church bells ringing peacefully, monks writing in candlelight. But in reality, faith was woven with fear. The church dominated every part of life from birth to death. People feared damnation, hell, and demons at every turn. A single word from a priest could condemn someone to excommunication, cutting them off from the community, believed to doom them to eternal fire. Superstition filled the gaps where science was absent. Illness was often blamed on sin, curses, or witchcraft. Crops failing could mean divine punishment. People clung to charms, relics, and rituals not out of hope, but out of desperation. In this world, faith was not only a comfort, but a chain. Chapter 7: The Grim Reality of Daily Life. So what was everyday life really like for the majority, peasants? Homes were one-room huts of wood or mud, with thatched roofs and dirt floors. Families shared space with their livestock to keep warm. Beds were straw piles crawling with fleas. Winters were freezing, summers brought waves of disease, and there was never enough food. Life expectancy hovered around 30 to 35 years. Survival was not expected beyond old age. It was a miracle. For peasants, life was a relentless cycle of back-breaking labor, hunger, and fear of sickness or violence. The Middle Ages are remembered as an age of castles and legends, but behind the myths lies a darker truth. For most, life was not romantic. It was short, cruel, and suffused with terror. The next time you picture a fairy tale castle, remember the reality. Beneath the banners and stone walls were rats, disease, hunger, and despair. The disturbing truth is that for the people of medieval Europe, the fairy tale was a nightmare they could never wake from. When you really stop and think about it, we are very lucky to be living in the time that we are living in. You can even say that the average person living in America today, whether rich, poor, or somewhere in between, they had a lot better than a king in the Middle Ages. It's always important to have a perspective on things such as this, because it makes us appreciate all the things that we have in life that we take for granted every day. I hope you enjoyed this little dive back in time with me. If so, please like and subscribe for more interesting and weird stories such as true crime deep dives, mysterious unsolved cases, and much more. Until next time, please stay safe out there, and as always, stay curious.